So welcome everybody. Want to just get started. We only have an hour and I know it's your lunch break. So welcome to our third in a series of webinars to talk about what a just transition looks like. We all within the staff and the organization, the roundtable, we all continually ask ourselves, what's the meaning of a just transition? And we're hopeful that these webinars will help answer some of those questions and lead to other questions and to open up a flood of ideas. And we want you to be able to put questions in the chat and to be a part of this. We have three great speakers who are going to be presenting. It's Marcus Brown, who's with Vineyard Wind, and his title, and I hope I get this right, Marcus, is Workforce Development and Local Supply Chain Coordinator. He's in Bridgeport. Bernie Pelletier, who many of you already know, is with the People's Action for Clean Energy. And Bryan Garcia, who I'm sure many of you also know, is with the Green Bank. That wasn't to say, Marcus, that people don't know you, but they will after this for sure. Again, we want to make sure that you stay muted during the conversation, and please put questions in the chat as we move forward. And I want to thank Allison Pilcher, our staff crack policy director, and turn it over to Michelle Ekman, who is our associate director of the roundtable. So welcome everybody. Michelle, you're on.
Hey everybody. Thank you so much for doing the housekeeping and kicking things off, Aziz. As Aziz mentioned, this is our third in a series. I also want to let you know, if you hadn't noticed, we are recording this session. We're going to be loading it up on YouTube. If you are camera shy, you can go ahead and turn your camera off. And so each one of our speakers is going to speak for about 12 minutes. And then each will have a question and answer period after each one. And then the last 10 minutes are going to be reserved for you all to ask questions. They're probably going to have some conversation and talk to each other really about like the whole picture. There's, a lot of opportunity for us to have dialogue with one another. I think that's really important. We don't want you just to feel like you have to passively sit there and look at your screen. Please do put questions in the chat. And if we have some time, even some live questions will be possible. So before I go on any longer, I'm going to turn this over to Bernie.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thanks to the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs for having me on this panel to talk about renewable energy in Connecticut, renewing our commitment to a just transition. I've subtitled this, I've sort of repurposed John McCain's famous drill baby drill to say build baby build. So that's the theme of what I'm going to be talking about. And Allison, on the next slide, I've got some markers here just to make it clear what I'm talking about. This is sort of, I'm going to paint a picture of what this future might look like, what this renewable future involves, and then we can talk about the jobs and how we bring equity into the picture. PACE has a 5-step process to bringing this renewable future to the present. The 5 steps are to benchmark current energy use, to lower our consumption of energy, to produce that energy which we end up using in a renewable fashion, site that locally and regionally. And we'll hear from Marcus, one of the key regional producers. We're going to have to change our grid to make all this possible. So a little conversation on that, and then community programs that will help the residents in a particular town, and we do operate in towns, to adopt this future. So Allison, on the next slide, what does this actually look like? And what you're seeing here is one town, Clinton, down on the shore, but essentially this looks the same for our 168 other Connecticut towns. And I'm going to take you through it very quickly. The blue bars on the left represent today's 2019's energy consumption expressed in gigawatt hours, which is billion watt hours. You've got electricity use, you've got gas heat, which you can express as in terms of electricity, oil heat, and transportation. So all the vehicles owned by people in Clinton, how much do they consume in a year expressed in terms of electricity? That peak blue bar in the middle, that's 539 gigawatt hours of power. That's their current use. So that's the first step on the PACE pathway. We know what we're doing now. So how do we take it down? So you see on the right, 3 red bars. We can knock it down a little bit for just efficiency, LED light bulbs, more efficient appliances. The next 2 bars, heat and transportation, are big, and they involve what's called beneficial electrification. So instead of burning stuff, we're going to use electricity. Once you take that 539 and you knock it down, what you're left with is 207 gigawatt hours. So we've knocked it down by more than half. And people are still very comfortable. People are still driving and doing what they like to do. But in this world, it's much more efficient. You'll notice that the color of the bar is green, which means that we are finding that electricity from renewable sources, offshore wind being one of those. The little floating bar that's 59, that's how much we think we can site locally in a town like Clinton. And then what we can't site locally in the town, we're going to get from the regional grid. And so Allison, on the next slide, what you see is what Connecticut might look like between now and 2050. You see the red, which is the non-renewable amount of our power. So gasoline, diesel, etc. You see it at the peak, and you see it gradually coming down as we head towards 2050. Even as we're driving that down year by year, town by town, house by house, we're ramping up renewables, and that's the green. And when the red meets the green, at that point, we are 100% renewable. So let's just talk a little bit on the next slide about how we do that reduction. All I would say from this slide is that significant energy reduction is possible. And on the next 3 slides, I'm going to give you a little picture of how. How are we going to do this? You're wise if you're suspicious, because it's not easy, but part of it is easy. Why am I showing you these rooftops? I am showing you these rooftops to say that right now, all of our hard-earned money and all of our burning of fuel, our houses are not efficient. And so when you look at a roof, any one of these roofs, and you can see how the snow is melting, what's happening there is the homeowner is burning something in their house. The heat is rising up through an inefficient, uninsulated attic and melting the snow on the roof. We can stop that. So step 1, just don't waste as much. Allison, on the next slide, a big thing that we can do is electrify heating. And if we were between our caveman ancestors and today, we've all heated ourselves the same way. We find something, it might be wood, it might be coal, it might be natural gas. We set it on fire and we sit close to it, and that's how we keep ourselves warm. The modern way to do that is to move heat, don't make it. And when you do that, paradoxically perhaps, 1 unit of electrical energy can move up to 3 or even more units of heat. So process that as achieving something like 300% efficiency. That's how we get that big red bar knocking our current energy use down. On the next slide, the next thing that we can do is we can electrify transportation. And perhaps you all know this, I hope that you do, but I like to point it out in a tangible way. I'm going to pick the Chevrolet Volt as an example of a special kind of car. It's a plug-in hybrid. And that Chevrolet Volt can operate in 2 modes. It can operate as a gas-only car or as an electric car. So that car is operating in gas mode. It gets 42 miles to the gallon. That's wonderful. But even more wonderful is when it's operating in electric mode and it gets 106 miles to the gallon. Same car, same trip, same driver, 60% reduction when it's operating in electric mode. If we do that across the transportation sector, including public transportation, we can knock our energy use down very substantially. On the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about production. So what you see on this graphic is put out by the Solutions Project, which is a project of Mark Jacobson, a professor in Stanford University, and it's his projection of what Connecticut might look like in the future. This man is a remarkable individual. He's done this sort of analysis for every state in the US. He's also done it for every country in the world. But anyway, this is Connecticut, where we are, and you can see that his view of the future energy mix is roughly 50% solar, a little bit on rooftops, a little bit on solar fields, and then lots of offshore wind, which Marcus, I'm sure, will introduce us to. On the next slide, we very quickly talk about the PACE approach. We help people think about how to site things locally, and you got a couple examples. So I would encourage all of you, when you see a roof, a parking lot, a right-of-way, a brownfield, a dump, a highway, an agricultural field where not all of it is usable, think about it as a potential source of electrons for our beneficial electrification. One project in particular that I want to share with you is PACE recently. We're very exciting people at PACE. So one of the things we love most at PACE is parking lots. And our wonderful intern has done a project where he examined 8,400 parking lots in Connecticut and said, if we did a solar canopy over those parking lots, how much energy could we produce? In the town of Clinton, which is what you're looking at here, believe it or not, it's a little town, but there are 30 sites. We could site 25.4 megawatts over those 30 sites, and that alone would supply 42% of Clinton's current energy consumption. So that's a brief thumbnail to say that we can find solar and renewable in a lot of places that we don't necessarily think of. The modern grid, just to touch on this more as a setup for the fact that there's a lot of jobs that are going to have to be aimed at changing this. So here we are, we're in a new century, but we have an old grid. The grid that we have in the upper right is something that if we could bring George Westinghouse or good old Tom Edison back, they would recognize every part of this. What we have to do is go to the lower right and have this future grid design. We need to be able to support distributed generation. All of us now are consumers. In the future, we'll be consumers and prosumers. We'll be making and taking. The grid has to be able to send the power both ways. As our former president was fond of saying, the wind doesn't always blow. There's a way to handle that, and that way is storage. We also can get smarter about how we use our power and when we ask the grid to give us power. And as we're seeing, as we look at the increasingly severe weather events, this grid needs to be resilient and secure. So very quickly, this view of power, if you take all of those comments that I made, what will it do? If you look at the light gray, brown, and black colors, that call them the non-colorful colors, you'll see that over the span of the next 30 years, we're going to knock those fossil fuels down, and we're gradually going to replace them with a green renewable mix. That green renewable mix, even though we're coloring wind blue, think of it as green, is going to be a mixture of solar and wind. So what does that mean if we think about jobs? That future is not going to make itself. We have to make that future, and that's where jobs come in. Very
I just
quick.
wanted to let you know you got 2 minutes.
2 minutes, thank you, that's perfect. Rewiring America is a fantastic resource. I urge you all to download this PDF and read it. And in particular, also find a paper by the same man, Mobilizing for a Zero Carbon America, Jobs, 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 and More Jobs. And a couple highlights I'm going to share next. First of all, what you see here, and there's only a couple numbers I want you to take away, is that if we focus on pure energy jobs only, that is to say, people who are actually in a coal mine or on an oil pipeline, not the people supporting them. There's only 1.2 million people exactly in the fossil fuel industry. The biggest source of so-called energy jobs by the Bureau of Labor and Statistics is 851,800 gasoline workers with convenience stores. So I found that to be surprising. So I'll probably stop after this next quote, Allison. This is taken with, to make it a little bit shorter, I've sort of edited it, but a lot of people say total decarbonization of America's energy system is portrayed as inconsistent. People think we can't economically grow and be decarbonized. In contrast, industrial and engineering analysis, which this individual has done, of what decarbonization would entail, demonstrates that aggressive decarbonization would create, rather than destroy, many millions of well-paying American jobs. The next paragraph is key. These jobs are both highly distributed geographically. They're not in Oklahoma or Texas or North Dakota or South Dakota. They're everywhere, and they're difficult to offshore. On the next slide, and I won't have time to go into this, he has taken what he views the future to be and turned it into jobs in the future. It's a massive amount of jobs. Let's just leave it at that. Maybe if there's time in the questions, we can come back to this.
Thank you so much, Bernie. I'm
Thank
sorry,
you.
go ahead. Do you want to finish your thoughts? Sorry.
No, not at all. I think that I would just ask folks to visually comprehend how many jobs there are. Like at the peak, if we were to go at this hammer and tong, close to 50 million jobs, either directly in the sector or supporting the sector, which is how this graph is portrayed.
Great. Thank you a ton. I'm sure there's lots of snaps and everything out there. Diane had an interesting point that she would love for you to elaborate on, and she's talked about, maybe you could mention how PACE and the Sierra Club of Connecticut are working very closely together regarding 100% clean renewable transition to a 100% clean renewable energy and a just transition, if you want to talk about that.
I would love to talk about that, and thank you, Diane, for that. So this is a multi-step process to get to this future. You have to envision what the future is, figure out if we can afford it, figure out what's involved, and that's where PACE, that's what PACE brings to the 100% picnic, if you will. But it's one thing to bring the food to the picnic. You have to bring some people to the picnic, and you have to have them eat the food. And the Sierra Club has many excellent talents, but one of them is mobilizing and activating and bringing people to the 100% picnic. And so we have found a very natural alliance as we sort of take this message, and which I think is more effective when PACE presents it alongside of Sierra Club. We go into a town sort of holding hands, and we say, this is from an engineering standpoint, what's involved. And Sierra Club says, here are the people who are going to come to this picnic and be supporters in a local town. It's a natural alliance that helps us get people on board to do this. And to be clear, we have all the sorts of technology that we need for a renewable future, or we will once offshore wind gets going up here in Connecticut. The problem, the central problem, is getting people to adopt that technology. And that's where Sierra Club is an instrumental partner in making it happen. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Maisa wanted to know if you have any data or graphics depicting the power usage in Bridgeport, similar to how you had for Clinton.
I thank you for that. At this moment, we do not. However, back at the shop, we do have the ingredients that we need to produce that picture. So for most towns, we have the utility data. In fact, for all towns, we have Eversource and UI data. So that's your electricity and gas use. And to get the oil, heat, and the vehicle consumption, we have to access the town grand list. So what the vehicles are in Bridgeport and what the building stock is. And I think we actually have that for Bridgeport. So it is an analysis that we could do. We like to have somebody in town say, hey, PACE, come on down to our Clean Energy Task Force or to the Board of Selectmen or to some town meeting. So if we're asked to do it, we will certainly do it.
Great. Thank you so much, Bernie. And I'm sure there'll be more questions towards the end of this webinar. Next, I'm going to turn this over to Marcus. Are you ready, Marcus?
I am ready.
Awesome. Take it away.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar. I'm sure it's going to be really informative for a lot of you. I just want to thank the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs for allowing me to be here today to present on the Park City Wind project, an affiliate of Vineyard Wind. So I'm going to go over this presentation and some timelines involved with building a project such as this. Next slide, please. So about Vineyard Wind. So Vineyard Wind was established back in 2010, based in New Bedford, Massachusetts, with offices in Boston, Massachusetts, and most recently in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where we're going to headquarters here to build the Park City Wind project. Fun fact, on Monday, we did the grand opening of the Bridgeport office, which is located in downtown Bridgeport. Vineyard Wind is a 50-50 partnership between Avangrid Renewables and Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners. We currently hold 2 federal lease areas for installment in southeastern New England. Projects that we were currently awarded were first Vineyard Wind, to be the first major off-scale wind project in the United States. And our second project we were awarded was Park City Wind, which I'm going to go into in the next slide. So some benefits. Park City Wind will provide 14% of Connecticut's electricity. That is a huge number considering a lot of major projects that are built in terms of providing energy are not in the green field. And this is the largest power purchase agreement in the state's history for green renewable energy. So we're really excited that Bridgeport was chosen to be the hub to build this project. This more than doubles the amount of new zero carbon renewable energy that was procured by DEEP to date. That number has not changed yet. And it's a major step towards 100% zero carbon electricity supply by 2040, which is an aggressive goal set out by Governor Ned Lamont. Connecticut will reduce more than 25 million tons of carbon dioxide while improving electric grid reliability in cold winter periods. We often see times where our grid is not so reliable and people oftentimes lose power. Offshore wind is a great resource to make sure that we see more reliable electricity and fewer outages in the area. And we're making huge investments into Connecticut's electricity grid. So I mentioned about the 25 million tons of carbon dioxide. Our project alone is estimated to be equivalent to removing almost 196,000 cars off the road in Connecticut. That's a huge deal. In Bridgeport alone, we're 147,000 residents. So that's almost equivalent to the entire city, removing all of the cars that we have here. Next slide, please. So this is a drawing of Barnum Landing, where we are going to be staging and building what we call transition pieces. Transition pieces are the yellow pieces that attach the actual turbine into the foundation of our assembly. And if you can see, those yellow pieces are what we're going to be building in Bridgeport. That's where the jobs are going to be in terms of building parts of the project. And then obviously construction of Barnum Landing will provide thousands of jobs to the trades, jobs for people with permitting and developing, and a bunch of jobs, which I'll go into in one of the further slides. But I just want to talk about this image here. The image that I have here on the right shows all the federal lease areas that were awarded to various companies. And if you look at the top right image, you can see in the orange column, it says Vineyard Wind 1. That's the project located in Massachusetts. It's the first commercial off-scale wind project lease area. And we share that lease area with Park City Wind. So, and then if you look down at the bottom, the other orange section, you'll see that Vineyard Wind has also been awarded another federal lease area, which we hope that we can provide another Connecticut project or another Massachusetts project. We're going to be bidding on another Massachusetts project soon. And if Connecticut decides to go out and procure more megawatts, we hope to be able to bid on that as well. And then, as you can see, other companies own separate lease areas along the coast, but we're focused specifically on Vineyard Wind's lease area here at the right. Next slide, please. So the image on the left shows where Bridgeport is as it relates to Connecticut, and those are the yellow little images you see there are the transition pieces. Those transition pieces will be placed on a barge, and those barges will be sailing right out of Long Island Sound into our designated lease area, which is depicted with the giant turbine right there in that lease area. This project is going to provide 804 megawatts of green renewable energy to Connecticut. And just in comparison, Massachusetts, our Vineyard Wind 1 project was 800 megawatts, which is the first in the nation. And we have 804 right here in Connecticut. So we won, they didn't. So I'm going to say that we win. Our lease area is OCS 501. It's what the BOEM categorizes these lease areas as. These are just some of the phases that we've gone through already. Right now, we're currently in the process of getting our construction and operation plan approved by BOEM, which talks about the construction of the project, some environmental mitigation plans that we may encounter, and what we plan on doing to address those concerns. So in Connecticut, we were awarded a 20-year power purchase agreement with the Connecticut utilities, which was approved, which is awesome. And we anticipate, and just hear me out when I highlight anticipate, to be built and operating in 2025. Now, I say that a lot of times and people go, well, Marcus said we're going to be running and up and running by 2025. And I always say, I anticipate, which without any hurdles, we are pretty confident about that number. Next slide, please. So transforming Barnum Landing. So our staging area for transition pieces, we're expecting that process to last for about 2 years. This is where the jobs are going to be building these transition pieces. They're going to come to the site on barges and pieces, and we are going to be putting them together, attaching ladders, the elevators, spray painting, bolts, and other welding. So a lot of jobs in welding and building. And then we will begin our operations and maintenance facility. The operations and maintenance facility is going to be here for 25 years. This is where we're going to host our technicians, some office personnel, warehouse staff, and this is where our folks will be when there's an issue with the turbine, or we're just doing regular inspection, which we do almost daily. They're going to be out of this warehouse, they're going to get on a barge, and they're going to go out to the site, and they're going to do whatever they need to do, whether it's painting the turbine, scrubbing the barnacles, tightening the bolts, and really these jobs are really high paid, high skilled jobs, and we have training opportunities for folks who are interested in doing those jobs as well. If you look at the bar image off to the right, this is the actual size of a transition piece. They're massive in size, and if you look at the top, you can see some people working on them. This specific transition piece, this specific turbine, it looks like it's a monopile foundation. We have not yet decided whether we're going to be using monopile or some form of a jacket style. The difference being the jacket has the 4 legs that is driven into the ocean floor, about 25 meters below the ocean surface, and then or the monopile, which is just a long rod, which is just driven right into the ocean floor. So we haven't decided which one we're going to go with, but this is what it will look like regardless of what foundation we choose. Next slide, please. So estimated project timeline. Remember what I said. Just remember the words estimated and we'll get along just fine. We are expected to be very close to this timeline, very close. So Vineyard Park City Wind was selected for the 804 megawatt project back in 2019. Currently, right now, between 2020 and 2022, we're going to be going through some state, local, federal permitting, project design, engineering, surveys, marine species observing, and continued stakeholder community outreach. So we continue to have our community outreach events. We incorporate a lot of our elected officials to host these events so they can reach out to their network so we can get as many people as possible, local NRZs. We're continuing to meet with them. Still in 2023, but this looks like more like end of 2023, early 2024, we expect to start the construction of Barnum Landing, which is a port in Bridgeport that has been underutilized and underdeveloped for as long as I can remember. And in 2024, we will begin offshore construction. This is the actual staging of the turbines, making sure the site is ready and putting together those turbines. And in 2025, we project that we will begin commercial operations. Turbines will be spinning, wind will be blowing, electricity will be provided to the Connecticut's electricity grid.
Marcus, just a 2-minute warning.
Perfect. Next slide, please. So currently, these are some of our partners that we're working with to begin, really making sure that the workforce exists, because right now there's not a single worker in the United States who knows how to build these turbines, knows what it takes to build these turbines. So what we're really doing is an educational piece. So we've had current partners like Survival Systems, which is going to offer our GWO training, which is a global wind organization training, which is required for anyone working in offshore wind. We're partnering with Helmets to Hard Hats, making sure we incorporate veterans into the workforce, and then local community colleges, the University of Bridgeport, which will be, we're going to be developing an offshore wind engineering program through them, and Building Pathways, which is going to make sure that we incorporate local folks into the trades, so that way they can work on building these projects in offshore wind, the construction, as well as career resources for assisting our second chance individuals, and CCAT, which is going to help us build our supply chain database, which is so important to make sure that we're utilizing Connecticut businesses to build these projects, supply our needs, because right now the industry doesn't exist. We want to build that industry, and CCAT's going to help us do that. Next slide, please. And if you look here, these are the project phases. Right now, we're in the planning and development stage, and these are the jobs associated with the planning and development. The bulk of the jobs will be in this construction phase, project engineers, construction and procurement managers, construction trades. These jobs are in the thousands. These are the jobs that are going to be helping us build this project, and without the construction folks, none of this would be happening. So we're excited about that. And then operations and maintenance, we're looking at these long-term jobs. These are the 25-year jobs that we have. Hopefully we can extend our agreement with the state of Connecticut, so that way these jobs last longer than 25 years, but these are the list of jobs during each phase of the project. Next slide. And I just wanted to include this image as some information on what the project looks like. This is the ship being raised up so that they're able to get from the boat and get pieces onto the turbines without the waves crashing and pushing people off. And is my 2 minutes up, Michelle?
It is.
Okay, I thought so.
I run a tight ship here, Marcus, but we do have some really great questions.
Oh, good.
That I want to see if you can answer for us. So will Bridgeport residents be given first dibs on these jobs?
That's a great question, and it's a question we hear a lot. So I'm a Bridgeport resident myself. So part of the reason I was hired on this for this project was to make sure that we incorporate as many Bridgeport folks as possible. When we talk about the construction jobs, we have incorporated as many local Bridgeport nonprofits and businesses to help us recruit Bridgeport people, to educate them on how to get involved in the jobs that are going to be happening, as well as using Bridgeport universities and colleges to make sure that you have access to the training required to build the project. So we're doing everything we can to make sure that happens. And the unions have committed to us to make sure that they incorporate as many people as possible from the town in which the project's going to be located, which is Bridgeport. So we have agreements from all of our partners to make sure that Bridgeport hiring is a focus, as well as making sure that the long-term 25-year jobs are a priority for Bridgeport residents, because I will have a lot of say in who gets hired on those and who gets trained and what scholarships are offered. So yes, Bridgeport people will.
So reassuring. I love that second to last slide that you had. I mean, maybe I'm a little biased because I'm obviously really concerned about the just transition to a low carbon future. But there's a really sound plan in place. You gave some very clear specifics, like who the relationships with, who the partners in this, and that's really, truly exciting. Bernie asked a really good question about some of the infrastructure aspects of things. And I don't know if that's feedback I'm getting, so I'm going to mute myself in a moment. So apologize for that. But is Park City Wind responsible for the cables that are going to bring the power to shore?
Yes, we will be providing the cables. Now, the cables will not run to Connecticut. Right now, the cables are currently expected to land in a town called West Barnstable. That's in Massachusetts, where currently the other cables for the Vineyard Wind 1 project is going to be run through. But the jobs and the electricity will be provided to Connecticut only.
Got it. Okay, great. And we actually will need to move on, but I do want to touch on these two questions that Maisa asked. How many of these jobs are union and non-union? Will there be drug testing that will be required? Would that disqualify people for work? And then is the only pathway for these jobs through unions? And then I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later too, the issues around equity and diversity. So yeah, that's a lot. There's a lot there. We could have like a number of other just whole webinars on this very important issue, but I want to make sure we touch on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's a huge focus of mine. One of the problems that we see in offshore wind and just energy itself is the lack of people of color, women, members of the LGBTQ community. So we've already established a committee to address some of these issues. We've hired a renowned diversity, equity, inclusion coach who's going to go through our entire hiring practices, both internally and externally, to make sure that we're not missing anything. We also are going to make sure that we focus on the communities in which are highly impacted. And one of the ways we see that is through access to education for a lot of communities of color, which is why we're going to be providing scholarships to those individuals who may not have access to the funding required to take training or to take the courses which are going to be required. And I think that it'll be successful, but obviously I can't do this alone. I use as many partners as I can to address some of these gaps in hiring. So if you have a recommendation for partners to work with or people we should be reaching out to, I'm more than happy to accept that. And my email, I'll type that in the chat for anyone who wants to talk.
Thank you so much, Marcus. And I've been summarizing some of these questions just in the interest of time, but I'm going to compile a list of the questions in their specific form, in their accurate form, and we'll make sure we get really thorough answers to the people that have asked them. These are really important. I am now going to move and turn this over to Bryan Garcia from the Connecticut Green Bank. Bryan, are you there? Are you ready to go?
All right. I think I'm ready to go. I've been having my system's been a little bit unstable, but I think we're all squared away. I wanted to start off by thanking Aziz, Michelle, Allison, and the rest of the roundtable team for including the Green Bank in this great presentation. It's been great to reconnect with old friends, Bernie and the People's Action for Clean Energy. It's great to see all the activity happening at the community level and reconnecting with him. And then beginning to create new friends with Marcus. I mean, Marcus, it's just great to see what Vineyard Wind is doing in terms of developing the offshore wind industry and specifically targeting Bridgeportians in terms of creating jobs locally. So really cool to see that. Let's go to the next slide there, Allison. I'm not going to spend too much time here. I'm just going to, for those of you who are on, you probably are aware of the Connecticut Green Bank, but to simply say that our mission is to confront climate change. We've probably all gotten far too used to polar vortexes, heat domes, rain bombs. It's happening, it's around us. We need to do what we can to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and to adapt to the impacts of climate around us. So our mission is to confront climate change. But our vision is really around a planet protected by the love of humanity. And that's to say that if we can't find ways to care about each other, then we're never going to solve the environmental problems that we're after. So our vision statement is really one of equity and inclusion to attack and confront the issue of the environmental protection. Let's go to the next slide. So this is, and I'm going to ask you, Allison, if you can click twice just to get the movement out of the way. So this is a bit of a busy chart. I know Bernie had some busy images on there as well. But let me just describe what's happening here. And it looks like those boxes didn't go exactly over where they should. But so big picture, when we're thinking about the Paris Agreement, right? So the Paris Agreement really has three elements to it. It has mitigating or reducing greenhouse gas emissions to ensure the science of climate change. Secondly, it has adapting to the impacts of climate change because we know it's here. So we need to adapt and become more resilient to its impacts. And the third is to ensure that we're seeing more capital flow in mitigation and adaptation. So what I thought we'd start off with is just kind of where are we in terms of climate finance and capital flows in mitigation and adaptation on climate change. So this is what this image is getting at. So in 2017 and 2018, what we saw is about $575 billion of finance going into mitigation and adaptation. That is about $80 per person per year. So $80 per capita. Overwhelmingly, 95% of that investment went into mitigation. So lots of the things that Bernie presented, renewable energy, energy efficiency, battery storage, and the like. 30 billion is in adaptation. So these are the things that we're going to have to start investing in to make ourselves more resilient to the impacts that we see happening around us. About half, about $300 billion of that investment is coming from government, the public sector, local, state, national, international, versus about $275 billion from the private sector. So we really need to find ways of taking public sector funds to mobilize more private investment in the things that we want to see in our green economy. And that is kind of nuts and bolts, essentially, what the Connecticut Green Bank does. So key takeaway, lots of investment happening, not enough in mitigation. There needs to be more in adaptation. We're seeing $1 roughly of public funds per $1 of private. And we need to get to another order of magnitude. So it's about $80 per person per year now at $575 billion. We need to be at about $6 trillion per year to address sustainability around the planet. That is a UN number. So we need another order of magnitude. Let's go to the next slide. So now I'm going to bring it down to a very micro level to here in Connecticut. What we have to do, go ahead and click it twice, Allison. Is to Bernie's point, we have to create demand. We have to use the market to get people to want to pursue clean energy. So, it may be that somebody starts off with a bill of $100 per month. Well, if we can help that individual lower their energy bill by installing more renewable energy, more energy efficiency, and providing them the capital to do that, then we can actually put more money back in their pocket. So the focus of the Green Bank is making capital more available and accessible to families and businesses so that they can access the benefits of the clean energy system. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so I'm going to give one example, and we have many tools in the Green Bank toolbox. This is just one of them. This is our Solar for All program. One of the things we recognized in 2014, when we looked at all the data, we were mobilizing private investment in solar PV on residential rooftops across the state. We were seeing great results. But when we asked ourselves the question of where was that investment happening, it was clear that we were leaving low to moderate income communities behind. So we made a concerted effort in 2015 to refocus what the Green Bank was doing in the sector and to make sure we were driving more investment from the private sector into vulnerable communities. We ended up issuing an RFP. We discovered a company called Posigen from New Orleans, Louisiana, who I'll speak about in a second. We also did some research on credit scores and income. There is a perceived a bias that just because you are low income means you have poor credit. That is not the case. There is no correlation on that in Connecticut. So we shared that research with the developers in the state and the financial institutions in the state. We want to see them investing in vulnerable communities. Let's get beyond the bias. We also increased an incentive to low to moderate income families, essentially providing 2.5 times what non-LMI families would receive. So when you package all of that together with Posigen, this company from New Orleans, we brought them up to Bridgeport. We surrounded them with private investment. They were able to launch their Connecticut presence. They're now a top 3 solar installer in the state. But what they do is they provide a solar lease and energy efficiency to families. And some of the data here, we've done about 4,100 projects, a total investment of about $115 million, nearly 30 megawatts of solar. All these projects have energy assessments. They now are required to have energy efficiency built into them. We've done the analysis. We can completely eliminate the energy affordability gap for people who participate in this program. That is to say that every year we can wipe out $1,300 of energy expenses that they would have paid that is unaffordable to low to moderate income families by saving through this program. This is one arrow in our clean energy finance quiver. Obviously, we need a lot of other examples like this to be able to ensure that the clean energy economy is available to everyone. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide is actually a block in Bridgeport. Families, they're all realizing the benefits and they're talking to each other about the benefits of clean energy. All right, let's hang out on this slide, Allison. This is the clean and resilient energy evolution slide. I will move through this quickly, just given the time. But this is all to say that Connecticut is in a moment of transition in terms of how we're dealing with solar on residential rooftops in the state. The Green Bank has been the administrator of a program that is the Northeast leading program in terms of deployed watts per capita. We are now transitioning to another form of compensation that starts January 1st of 2022. The utilities will be administering what is called the Tariff program. I'm excited to say that through the leadership of the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, that program will have additional components to it, ensuring that solar PV is more affordable and accessible to low to moderate income families. Adders for low income families. If you live in a distressed community, there are adders, direct payments, a number of different things. We're also working on a battery storage program. Pura is a week away, a week from today, they will rule on a battery storage program that has twice the level of incentives for vulnerable communities. So we fully expect to see solar, battery storage, energy efficiency working together to not only reduce energy costs for participating families, but to also make them more resilient to grid outages by having backup power. So that's all very, very exciting. And of course, that leads the way to all the things that Bernie was talking about in terms of renewable heating and cooling, air source heat pumps. We want to see that decarbonization for how we heat and cool our buildings, and then ultimately electric vehicles as well. Let's go to the next slide. I'll kind of wrap up here in a few moments. So here's another thing that folks can do is you can buy a Green Liberty Bond. So, the Green Bank traditionally, what we do is we work with financial institutions to provide to families and businesses essentially loans. So if you need a loan to finance clean energy improvements, that's what we're working hard to create for you. But in this context, we're designing something new. We want to create an investment vehicle that allows families to buy fixed income securities, in this case, a bond, whereby they would receive a fixed income return over a number of years. We created the Green Liberty Bond last year to honor the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. These are bonds modeled after the war bonds of the 1940s. So we want to sell them to people. The key around this bond is that they are available to individuals. That is that the face value of a bond can't be more than $1,000. Fingers crossed, we're working really hard. Potentially, we will see that come down to $100. The more we can lower that bond denomination value, the more we can make this investment instrument available to the masses. So this is a Green Liberty Bond. The proceeds have to be used to confront climate change. Everything I talked about earlier on the Paris Agreement, low denomination, and they have to be independently certified and verified as a green climate bond. So stay tuned next year for the third year of our Earth bond, our Green Liberty Bond, and fingers crossed on a much smaller investment opportunity that we're bringing to our board, in fact, this week. Let's go to the next slide. All right, workforce development, then one final announcement. So what I wanted to say is we've been working with, through the U.S. Energy and Employment Report, which is something that's been done, supported by the DOE, through the Energy Futures Initiative, BW Research Partnership, through the Joint Committee. So the Connecticut Green Bank and the Energy Efficiency Board, together, the Joint Committee, has last year issued our Clean Energy Industry Report on the clean energy workforce in Connecticut. You can see where we had estimated the market would be in 2020 before COVID hit. And obviously COVID played a big part in impacting Connecticut. The end of the year, we're actually looking at now our 2020 data, and we ended 2020 at 41,500 clean energy jobs in Connecticut. That is a loss of 2,600 jobs, about 6% of our clean energy workforce, versus the state economy at 7%, versus Massachusetts at 11%, and versus the US at 9%. So Connecticut's clean energy workforce was a little bit more resilient than the rest, but still we lost jobs as a result of COVID. One of the things that's really important as we look ahead is ensuring that the clean energy economy we're creating leads to more jobs for females in the workforce, Hispanic and Black people in the workforce as well. You can take a look at those numbers. Obviously, we have got a long way to go to ensure that we have more females in the clean energy workforce. For Hispanic and Black people, we also need to see some significant improvement there as well. So again, great to see some of the work happening in and around the state. We need to work a lot harder to make sure that this clean energy economy, not only from what people are doing at their homes and businesses, but the workforce truly represents diversity in our state. And lastly, let's go to the last slide. I would just invite everybody tomorrow to a webinar that the Green Bank is hosting on the history of environmental justice in America. We've actually got a video presentation from Dion Ferris, the president of the Institute for Sustainable Communities. I just watched it about an hour ago. It is extraordinary. Like, where did it all start? She provides the history of Executive Order 12898, which was signed under President Clinton in 1994, what led to that moment, what happened as a result of it, and where are we today? And then we're going to have a conversation with the panel on the front lines of climate justice today in Connecticut that's moderated by Lonnie Reed. Includes John Harity of the Roundtable, Representative Geraldo Reyes leading on the Environmental Justice Bill, and Brenda Watson of Operation Fuel. So I would invite everyone there to sign up, and I will probably send a link to the chat here in a second. But
wonderful.
thank you.
Bryan, thank you so much. Wonderful presentations by all. I certainly learned some things that I did not know before from each one of you. But there's really something that I would love for the three of you in the few minutes that we have left to talk about, what is renewable energy's role in addressing not just the climate crisis, but how does the renewable energy sector, the field, the industry as a whole, address the crisis associated with racial, economic, and social inequality? Whoever wants to jump in, go for it.
Yeah, let me take a crack at it. I just think the term renewable energy in and of itself connotes a lot of things. We may all think of it as technology, solar, wind, all those sorts of things. But when you think of things that are renewable, what is renewable in our life? It's like love, right? So if we think about a sustainable thing that helps us, have better lives, it's love for each other. So I would just throw out there that renewable energy as a technology is symbolic of the equity that we need to see in our society. And to the extent we could make it more accessible through offshore wind development, through solar deployment, through all the things that we're all working very hard to see more of, that's going to bring us together. So I just start there at a high level.
Yeah, I would say that renewable energy and specifically offshore wind, we have the, I think, obligation to try to correct some of the problems systemic that we've been seeing in the workforce in the United States, specifically when we look at new industries. And I'll talk briefly about marijuana in Massachusetts, for example, because they were one of the first in the nation, which was promised to include as many diverse populations as possible to correct some of the actions done through the last 100 years. But they failed. We saw in Massachusetts that the lack of people of color involved in the growing and the selling of marijuana legally has not been what was promised in Massachusetts. So I think with any new industry, we have an obligation to make sure that we're not falling into the same traps as previous industries, and to make sure we lead on some of these initiatives such as diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm up for the challenge when it comes to offshore wind, and specifically with Vineyard Wind. And I hope many of the other industry partners are up to the task as well.
I could jump in very quickly and say, I agree with the prior two comments. If you think about what fossil fuel is, it's got two things. It's the sources are distant. So the makers are far away. They're Saudi Arabia, the Arab Emirates, or Oklahoma. And it's also concentrated. If you think of what renewable is, it's local and regional. So it brings it home and it's distributed. So it's not concentrated. And I think with that as a stage, I think it allows us to do some of the things that Marcus and Bryan talked about, is we can get more people in on the act. We're no longer consumers and just takers, we're makers and takers. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that we're running out of time, but I think this question is really important. So how do we make renewables more accessible to low income and low to moderate income households?
That is a great question. I would say a couple things. I really think looking ahead in terms of January 1st, that's a start date to several new programs, a residential renewable energy tariff program and a battery storage program. I can tell you that the design of those programs, because Chair Gillette at the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority made it a priority for these technologies to be deployed in vulnerable communities, that you're going to see significant incentives that make that technology more affordable to low to moderate income families. But now what we all need to do is to reach out, find families, connect them to the incentives, connect them to the financing to make it happen. Just because the incentives are there doesn't mean the market is going to move towards helping those families. We all need to work together to help provide families with the information they need and get them the sources of capital they need to make it all happen.
Right on, right on. Thank you for that. Anybody else have any closing comments before I turn it back over to Aziz?
Just thank you, Michelle.
Thank you all so much. And thank you for all of you who came, and thanks for watching the recording back at home.
I just want to close by saying, if you look out your window right now, there's a haze outside. And if you looked at last night's sunset, the sunset was a reflection of the fires that are out on the West Coast. And if you don't think that the climate crisis affects you, again, take a look out your window. It's here, it's real. But the other part I just want to reemphasize too is that I think I know we have to take the climate crisis and use it as a way to be more resilient, but also to address structural racism. This is a perfect opportunity. I think you've heard me say this like 10,000 times, and I've only been here a year, but I'll say it another time. I don't want a new normal. A new normal didn't work. A new normal will not work. These three panelists, Bryan, Bernie, Marcus, you all brought to us a whole different way of looking at things. And if you have one takeaway from this, it's to look at things differently. We don't have to go back to what we used to do, but we need to move forward in a new direction. And that direction means that no haze outside your window. That means that we make sure that equity and diversity and inclusion is all part of this renewable energy. And it means that we have to re-examine what a just transition looks like and make sure that it's not just two words, that it's action and it's actionable. And you all on this know how to do this, and we can do it together. So thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. Thank you, panelists. You're fabulous. We're going to keep doing this. We're going to keep talking and try to figure out answers and try to get questions. And have a wonderful day. Take care of yourselves. Be well. Thanks, everyone. Bye.